Well, I mean, I think just to sort of tap onto sort of what Devin was saying in sort of defining the value. Value is in many ways relative as well, right? So I think, why is a wedding ring that is, valuable amongst two generations? Certainly the silver in which it is made of is not that valuable, right? However, for the family that owns it, it's an invaluable sort of product because there was sentimental value attached, right? Just the same way that Roger Federer's tennis racket is more valuable, even though you probably can't play with it anymore because it's all beaten up. But you can buy the brand new same racket for a much lower price elsewhere. So this is where value gets interesting when you talk about the digital space, because of course there you don't have decay in the same way, but the assets have provenance, and that's why we're excited about blockchain, because blockchain can attach history to it as well as to who owned it, what happened to it. Is it a sword that was owned by this esports guy? Is it owned by a famous person, or is it just my son that I want to pass it down to the next generation, right? So that's exciting because the scarcity aspect comes from the fact that there is a story to every asset, as it is in the real world, right? When they were made, they weren't valuable, but then they have a story. And the problem about games or most virtual assets and goods today is that they reside in the centralized database that effectively has no value because they get shut down, right? And of course, you have great organizations like Second Life that basically sort of promise. They become sort of that center and say, we will promise that you own this asset and we'll make sure that you'll never lose it, right? But those are still locked inside Second Life. In the real world, the value is defined by law and by government that says you own it, right? But in the virtual world, you don't have that. And I think one of the things that's interesting is that games I view kind of as like sort of feudal kingdoms. So they're sort of in the dark ages, pre-Middle Ages almost, where they basically all the value attributes up to really just the small group of people that run it, which also means that the community themselves have very little interest in sort of making it better. They enjoy it maybe, or they can have the privilege of being there, but there's absolutely no friction really, innovative friction, because they don't really gain from that. And so what's exciting here, and more value I think comes increased, is that if actually people do have a stake in it and do have something to build, value will increase because you have competitive friction, right, for creation and making. In the same way that Second Life or Roblox or EVE, well, to some extent EVE Online have done, but still in centralized environments. And I think where I see sort of the value of those goods come up is that you have this free trade, right? Like what did free trade do in the real world? Capitalism and all that. We think free trade of virtual assets will explode. Enter the brands part. Brands, we think, one of the reasons we chose to work with brands is because we think it is an angle for non-blockchain people to come into the field, right? Because, I don't know anything about blockchain, but I do know I like Formula One, or I do know I like MotoGP, right? And we have a history of collectibles. What I love about that is that you can make, like we have a Formula One game where you can play and race with it, but at the same time, even if I don't like to race with it, I can still own the car, right? And so you can then, and the other thing that's interesting is that even that car that maybe I don't like to play in this game, I can move it to another game. And like in this real world where I could buy a Ferrari and I could drive it in the Autobahn in Germany, or I could drive it somewhere in Hong Kong, maybe not very fast, right? But I could do whatever I want with it because I own it. And the brand owner is no longer in a position to say, wait, hold on, you don't own that, right? You can't do that because again, the container of value is the car itself. It's not the game. The game may shut down and we won't have an F1 game, but the person who bought the assets owns it and can use it freely elsewhere. And that brings in itself some really exciting opportunities. So the one thing I will point out though is that therefore the value of these assets need to come with the appropriate rights. So when you talk about brands, like we ensure that all of our IP licenses have perpetual rights. This is really important because with the blockchain side, you have one of the issues, which is that you can own the token forever, but do you own the image rights, right?
Right.
And because you could own the token, but you may not have an image attached to it because the license expired, right? So right now it's early in the space, so you don't have you don't have a sort of a Sotheby's or something that sort of gives a rating and says, hey, you know what, this digital asset has permanence and therefore has value, or looking at Josie's art and saying, here's why that's valuable, right? We're very early, but as the space evolves, you'll get to that point. And so third-party values will come in because there's a market for that, right? It's people are building it up. What is it? I think the report, I think Devin was working on, said like $300 million of NFTs currently roughly trading around. And by the time we hit $1 billion, there's going to be lots of other people that will have a business around valuing this stuff. So that's it's a growing space.
Thank you. Tyler, I believe you had your hand up earlier. Sorry if I skipped you. Would you like to add something?
It's amazing